Wow, you've really brought us some fascinating stuff to dig into this time. Like, really, really fascinating. This whole question of consciousness, what happens when we die. I mean, it's like the ultimate mystery, right?
It really is one of those enduring mysteries that has captivated humans for, well, probably as long as we've been aware of our own mortality.
Exactly. And the sources you've shared, like those excerpts from Pim van Lommel's Consciousness Beyond Life and Sam Parnia's Erasing Death, they're just packed with thought-provoking ideas. And then you threw in that scientific paper on brain activity during cardiac arrest, which just adds another layer of complexity.
I thought it'd be interesting to bring those different perspectives together. You've got scientific research, personal accounts of near-death experiences, philosophical reflections, and even some historical perspectives on the afterlife.
Right. It's like a multidimensional puzzle. So, for this deep dive, our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to sift through all of this material, pull out the key insights, and hopefully uncover some of those aha moments that make these explorations so rewarding.
And maybe even challenge some of our preconceived notions along the way.
Absolutely. I'm all for that. So, to kick things off, Van Lommel really gets to the heart of the matter in Consciousness Beyond Life by asking these fundamental questions about consciousness itself, like where do we go when we sleep? What happens to our awareness under anesthesia? And what about those in comas or even declared brain dead? These are questions that really make you stop and think.
Yeah, he's really pushing us to examine our assumptions about what consciousness is and where it resides.
I know. That example he gives about the patient in a vegetative state who showed brain activity when asked to imagine playing tennis. Like, how is that even possible?
It really challenges the idea that consciousness is solely dependent on our ability to interact with the world or communicate our thoughts and feelings.
Right. It suggests there might be a deeper level of awareness that can exist even when those outward expressions are absent. And then you have those incredible accounts from people like Alison Corthall's Altes, who remembered seeing and hearing hospital staff while she was in a coma, or Jan Kirchhoff's, who reported having conscious experiences after being declared brain dead.
Those are powerful stories. It makes you wonder if our current medical definitions of consciousness and death might be too limited.
I'm with you on that one. It's these kinds of stories that really force us to confront the big question. Could consciousness somehow persist after death?
It's the question, isn't it? And Van Lommel makes an interesting point about how, as a society, we tend to shy away from talking about death. Even though it's a universal human experience, he even cites the daily mortality statistics.
Hmm.
Thousands of deaths every single day in the US, the Netherlands, the UK alone.
Yeah.
It's a reality we all face, yet we often treat it as taboo.
It's true. We're almost afraid to even acknowledge it. Which brings us to the whole fascinating realm of near-death experiences, or NDEs. And what's really interesting, as both Van Lommel and Parnia point out, is that these experiences aren't exclusive to people who are actually close to death.
Right. They can happen during intense periods of isolation, in states of deep depression, and even through practices like meditation. It seems like any experience that pushes us to the edge of our normal consciousness can potentially trigger an NDE.
And there's a whole range of triggers associated with NDEs, too. We know cardiac arrest is a common one, but they've also been reported after brain damage, comas, severe blood loss, near drowning incidents, you name it. It's almost like the body going through extreme physiological stress can somehow open a door to these experiences.
It's like a survival mechanism kicking in, perhaps even at the level of consciousness itself.
Interesting thought. Now, when we talk about NDEs, we have to mention Raymond Moody's work. Back in the mid-70s, he really put them on the map by identifying those 12 common elements that people often report, like the feeling of peace, the out-of-body experience, the tunnel of light, and so on.
Right, and Van Lommel points out that it's rare for someone to experience all 12 of those elements. Most people report just a few, which adds another layer of complexity to trying to understand what's really going on.
And I find it fascinating that similar elements were being reported even before Moody's book came out. It suggests that people weren't just being influenced by his descriptions.
Absolutely, and it adds a level of credibility to the phenomenon, suggesting that there's something more to it than just cultural suggestion or imagination.
For sure. But there are some interesting cultural variations, too. Like those classic elements of the tunnel experience, the detailed life review, seem to be less common in accounts from indigenous cultures of North America, Australia, and the South Pacific. It's like, how does culture shape what we experience, or at least how we interpret and share those experiences?
It's a question worth pondering. It could be that certain elements are universal, while others are colored by cultural beliefs and expectations.
Right. So much to unpack there. Now, one of the most frequently reported and maybe most mind-boggling aspects of NDEs is the out-of-body experience, or the OBE. And this is where the work of researchers like Dr. Michael Sabom becomes really intriguing.
Yes, Sabom found that people who report OBEs often describe observing their resuscitation from an elevated perspective, feeling unable to communicate with those around them, moving by thought alone, and even passing through solid objects.
It's like defying the laws of physics as we know them.
It is quite remarkable. And what's even more striking is the level of accuracy in the details that some NDE patients recall about their resuscitation compared to cardiac patients who didn't have an NDE.
You're talking about how they describe specific medical procedures, conversations between doctors, and even things that happened outside the room, right? It's hard to dismiss those accounts as just imagination or coincidence.
Exactly. And that firsthand stories are just so compelling. For instance, there's a case of that surgery patient who described floating above the operating table, hearing the medical team's conversations, even picking up on their thoughts. And then the doctor confirmed, saying he thought the patient had died and was astonished that they had heard him say that.
Wow, that's chilling. And then you have Vicky's experience during her car accident. Remember, she described seeing the whole wreckage and then the emergency room from above, recognizing her own wedding ring on her body, and then feeling like she was going through the ceiling. These accounts often have this vivid, almost cinematic quality to them.
And then there's the account with the hourglass and the presence of translucent beings, combined with the overwhelming sense of peace and love, a brilliant light, beautiful music and colors. It's like a glimpse into a reality that operates outside of our normal perception of time and space. Even the recurring detail of a membrane preventing further progress in some NDEs.
It's like peeking behind the curtain of reality, isn't it?
It really is. And then there's the whole aspect of recognizing deceased individuals during these experiences. It's a recurring theme. There's that cardiac arrest patient who saw his deceased grandmother and his biological father, who he didn't even know had passed away at the time.
Right. And that coma patient who encountered Mr. Vanderjee, who had died during his coma. These encounters with deceased loved ones are some of the most emotionally powerful and honestly hardest to explain away from a purely materialistic perspective.
They are. And speaking of things that challenge a materialistic worldview, the panoramic life review is another key element of many NDEs that deserves attention. It's not just a simple replaying of events. It's described as this instantaneous three-dimensional experience where individuals see their entire lives, good and bad, with this profound understanding of cause and effect. And they often report experiencing not just their own actions, but also the thoughts and feelings of others involved in those events.
Like imagine reliving every choice you've ever made and seeing its impact on the world around you. That's got to be both exhilarating and terrifying, right?
Absolutely. And it speaks to a deeper level of interconnectedness, perhaps even suggesting that our actions have a ripple effect that extends far beyond what we perceive in our day-to-day lives.
And it's often described as seeing with all-knowing eyes. It's like an intense process of self-reflection and moral reckoning. It's interesting that this element is so frequently reported across cultures and time periods.
It is. And another consistent finding is that many individuals who have an NDE report a significant and lasting decrease in their fear of death. It's almost like they've caught a glimpse of what lies beyond and found it to be peaceful and even welcoming.
Like that 82-year-old terminally ill heart patient, the one who had a profound NDE years earlier and faced his own death with such serenity, surrounded by loved ones. It's a testament to the transformative power of these experiences.
It really is. And we also need to consider NDEs in children. While they often share similarities with adult NDEs, they tend to involve fewer of those classic elements we've been discussing. For example, Dr. Melvin Morse's research highlights the frequent occurrence of positive initial aspects, such as a loving environment, a kind voice, the presence of a benevolent being, and an overall sense of peace.
And it's fascinating how encounters with deceased grandparents or beloved pets seem to be more common than encounters with living parents in childhood NDEs. It suggests that these experiences aren't just a reflection of the child's immediate social circle or emotional attachments.
That's a good point. And interestingly, the life review that's so central to adult NDEs often appears later in childhood, typically around the age of 6. And another thing to keep in mind is that children often struggle to articulate these deeply personal experiences, sometimes waiting decades before they feel able to share what happened to them.
It must be so difficult for a child to process and make sense of something so profound, especially when the adults around them might not understand or believe them.
Absolutely. Now, to give us a broader context, let's zoom out and consider the historical and cross-cultural perspectives on consciousness after death. This isn't a new fascination, you
Not
know.
at all.
Right.
The ancient Egyptians, they had this whole elaborate system of beliefs about the soul's journey after death outlined in the Egyptian Book of the Dead.
Right. And then you have Plato, who in his Republic describes this vision of where a warrior is said to have died on the battlefield and returned to life 12 days later, recounting a journey to the afterlife and a judgment of souls.
Oh, and don't forget about Emanuel Swedenborg. His mystical experiences and writings in the 18th century were filled with insights about the spiritual realm and the afterlife.
Absolutely. And even in the 19th and early 20th centuries, there were numerous books published based on the mystical experiences of individuals like Annie Besant, Rudolf Steiner, Alice Bailey, all describing encounters with the afterlife and emphasizing the continuity of consciousness beyond death. And these accounts, in many ways, mirror the themes and elements found in modern NDE reports.
It's amazing how these threads seem to run through history and across cultures.
Yes. And let's not forget the insights from Eastern philosophical traditions. The Vedanta school of Hinduism, for example, views pure consciousness as the ultimate reality, with individual minds as reflections of this greater consciousness.
Right. And in Tibetan Buddhism, you have this concept of a cycle of death and rebirth, where consciousness continues in a subtle spirit body through an intermediate state known as the bardo.
And these historical accounts that bear a striking resemblance to modern-day NDEs are quite compelling, too. Like the story of that warrior who was said to have returned to life after 12 days on a funeral pyre. He described this vivid journey of his soul being judged in the afterlife. It's a narrative that echoes through the centuries.
And even excerpts from Dante's Divine Comedy, like those descriptions of passing through darkness into a serene atmosphere in purgatory, seem to capture something of that transitional experience reported by many who have had NDEs.
Right. And that 18th century account of the drowning survivor, who described a sense of tranquility in a panoramic life review filled with moral awareness, only to experience excruciating pain upon returning to physical life. It highlights this recurring theme of the contrast between the peace of the other realm and the often jarring return to the physical world.
It's like being ripped away from a dream, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. And Admiral Beaufort's near-drowning experience, where he described feeling perfectly healthy and mentally sharp during an out-of-body experience. These accounts, spanning different eras and cultures, really demonstrate that NDEs aren't just a modern phenomenon. It suggests that these experiences, though interpreted through various cultural and religious lenses, tap into something fundamental about human consciousness and its potential for transcending the physical body.
So, with all these historical and cultural parallels, it really makes you wonder, if NDEs aren't just a modern construct, how do they compare to other altered states of consciousness, like dreams? They both involve shifts in awareness and sometimes vivid imagery, right?
It's an important distinction to make. You see, dreams typically occur during REM sleep, when the brain is very active. But NDEs are often reported to happen when brain activity has ceased, at least according to our current medical understanding.
Right. So, in theory, the brain should be offline during an NDE, but people are reporting these incredibly vivid and lucid experiences.
Exactly. And those who had NDEs consistently describe them as feeling more real than any dream, often with an intense clarity and a sense of undeniable reality that's unlike anything they've experienced before.
It's like dreams tend to be a jumbled mix of recent memories, subconscious thoughts, and often tied to strong emotions. But NDEs seem to have this heightened sense of clarity and purpose, a sense of encountering something truly profound.
That's a key difference. And, the various scientific theories that attempt to explain NDEs through purely physiological or psychological mechanisms often struggle to account for certain key features.
Like what specifically?
Well, there's the consistent reporting of enhanced consciousness, the incredible vividness of the experience, the accelerated nature of thought processes, the seeming access to a deeper well of wisdom or understanding. And then you have the remarkable cross-cultural consistency in certain elements, even when brain function is known to be severely impaired.
You're right, that's hard to explain away as just a brain malfunction. And what about induced experiences, like those brought on by certain drugs or direct brain stimulation?
Right. Well, those induced experiences rarely, if ever, replicate the full spectrum of an NDE, and they usually lack the lasting transformative effects that so many people report after an NDE.
So there seems to be something unique about NDEs, something that goes beyond just altered brain chemistry.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Now, shifting gears a bit, let's look at some of the scientific studies that have specifically investigated NDEs.
Hmm.
In Erasing Death, Samparnia really emphasizes the stark reality of cardiac arrest.
Like how many people actually survive it?
Right. He points out that the mortality rate for cardiac arrest patients is quite high, even with multiple resuscitation attempts. And this makes the fact that people are having these lucid experiences during cardiac arrest even more remarkable.
It's like their heart has stopped, their brain isn't getting oxygen, and yet they're reporting these profound experiences. That's wild.
It is. And then there's Pim van Lommel's groundbreaking longitudinal study, which followed cardiac patients with and without NDEs for years. It was designed to determine whether the life changes often attributed to NDEs were due to surviving a critical event or to the NDE itself.
And the results were pretty amazing, weren't they?
They were. The group who reported NDEs showed significant increases in their interest in spirituality, a decrease in their fear of death, a heightened sense of intuition, a stronger feeling of interconnectedness with others, and a greater appreciation for everyday life. And these changes were far more pronounced and long-lasting in the NDE group compared to the control group of patients who had also survived cardiac arrest but didn't report an NDE.
So it wasn't just about surviving a brush with death. It was specifically the NDE that seemed to trigger these profound and enduring shifts in perspective.
Exactly. And then you have Dr. Penny Sartori's second British study. While it found a lower percentage of NDEs overall, it still revealed detailed accounts from those who had them, and a striking pattern of inaccuracies in how non-NDE patients recalled their resuscitation procedures.
Oh, yeah. That's like the NDE patients were able to describe things accurately, but the non-NDE patients couldn't,
That's
right?
right. And Sartori also highlighted how reluctant people can be to spontaneously report NDEs,
Hmm.
perhaps due to fear of being ridiculed or dismissed.
So it's possible that the actual prevalence of NDEs is higher than we think, but people are just keeping quiet about it.
It's certainly possible. And there's another intriguing point that Van Lommel makes about the timing of OBEs relative to the recovery of consciousness. He notes that the verifiable perceptions reported during OBEs often occur during the resuscitation process itself, well before full conscious awareness typically returns.
So it's not like they're having these experiences as their brains are slowly waking up. It's happening while they're still technically unconscious.
Exactly. And this really throws a wrench into the idea that NDEs are just a product of the brain trying to make sense of a chaotic situation.
It's like, how can the brain be constructing these elaborate experiences when it's supposedly not even functioning?
Right. It's a paradox. And Van Lommel also points out that the success rates of resuscitation can vary depending on where it takes place. Outcomes are generally better in a coronary care unit compared to out-of-hospital cardiac arrests, for instance.
Makes sense. The quicker and more effective the medical intervention, the better the chances of survival.
Right. And Van Lommel explains that even when resuscitation is successful, the electroencephalogram, or EEG, often flatlines after cardiac arrest, only recovering its normal activity once the heartbeat and blood pressure are stabilized.
So, for a period of time, there's no measurable electrical activity in the brain, but people are still reporting these experiences during that time. It's mind-boggling.
It is. Now, all of this leads us to the question that lies at the heart of this whole discussion. What is the role of the brain in consciousness, especially during these near-death events? And the case of Pamela Reynolds, which is mentioned in both sources, is particularly compelling.
Oh, yeah. This is the one where she had a near-death experience during brain surgery. Right.
And this was a very specific type of brain surgery, too. She was under general anesthesia, and her body temperature was lowered to a point where her brain was essentially non-functional.
Mm.
They call it induced hypothermia.
So her brain was basically offline.
As far as medical science could tell, yes. But here's the thing. She accurately recalled specific details of her surgery, including a conversation between the medical team about the size of her blood vessels.
No way. But if her brain wasn't working, how could she possibly have known those things?
Exactly. It's cases like this that really challenge the conventional view that consciousness is solely a product of brain activity.
It's like maybe the brain isn't the source of consciousness, but rather a receiver or a filter for it.
That's a possibility that some researchers and philosophers are exploring. Our sources touch upon this idea of the brain as an incredibly complex system of neurons and interconnected networks. It's often described as an organized chaos of self-organizing systems.
And we know from studies using EEGs and transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS, that communication between different areas of the brain is crucial for what we experience as consciousness.
Right. TMS is a technique that uses magnetic pulses to stimulate or inhibit activity in specific brain regions, and it's given us valuable insights into the brain's role in various cognitive functions.
But then you have thinkers like Sir Charles Sherrington, Sir John Eccles, Wilder Penfield, Mario Beauregard, Alvin Noe, who have all proposed alternative perspectives on the mind-brain relationship. They suggest that the brain might actually act more like a facilitator or a receiver of consciousness rather than the sole producer.
And Roger Penrose, with his quantum mechanical hypothesis, even suggests that consciousness could be rooted in deeper quantum-level processes happening within the brain.
So maybe we need to start thinking about consciousness as something that isn't entirely confined to the physical structure of the brain.
Exactly. And this brings us to the fascinating realm of quantum physics and the concept of non-local consciousness.
This is where things get really trippy, right?
They do, but in a way that might actually help us make sense of these otherwise inexplicable experiences. Think about that NDE account, where the individual describes feeling part of a larger, interconnected consciousness, recognizing particles of deceased loved ones, and accessing this vast reservoir of knowledge.
And the recurring description of sensing the presence of deceased individuals, not just by their appearance, but by some deeper intrinsic essence. It's like they're recognizing them on a level that goes beyond the physical.
Exactly. And then there's the common experience of feeling hesitant to fully merge with that larger consciousness, like they know if they do, they won't be able to return to their body. And another recurring theme is the struggle to express these profound feelings and insights using ordinary language.
Mm.
It's like words simply aren't adequate to capture the vastness of what they've experienced.
And then there's the often conscious decision to return to their physical body, often driven by a sense of purpose or an enduring connection to love and a feeling of gratitude.
It's like they're choosing life, even in the face of something incredibly alluring and peaceful on the other side.
So how does quantum physics fit into all of this?
Well, in quantum physics, you have these fascinating concepts like electromagnetic fields, coherence, interference, and the holographic principle, which could offer frameworks for understanding how information might be stored and accessed in a way that isn't strictly localized within the brain.
Okay, I'm following so far.
And then there are those key principles of quantum physics that really challenge our everyday understanding of reality: superposition, complementarity, uncertainty, and perhaps most importantly, entanglement or non-locality.
Remind me about entanglement again.
Entanglement is this phenomenon where two particles can be linked in such a way that they affect each other instantaneously, regardless of the distance between them. It's like they're communicating faster than the speed of light, which is mind-blowing when you think about it.
It is. So are you suggesting that there might be some kind of entanglement happening between consciousness and the brain, or even between individual consciousnesses?
It's a possibility worth exploring. You see, the apparent non-locality of consciousness in NDEs, where people seem to be aware of things happening far away from their physical bodies, and the instantaneous exchange of information that's often reported, these align with certain aspects of quantum theory.
So while quantum physics might not fully explain how consciousness arises in the first place,
Yeah.
it could potentially help us understand how consciousness might operate beyond the confines of the physical brain, and even how it might interact with the brain during those moments when normal brain function is suspended.
Precisely. And this is especially intriguing when we consider the scientific evidence showing absent or severely impaired brain activity during cardiac arrest, alongside the persistent reports of lucid consciousness in NDEs. It's a puzzle that current neuroscience, with its emphasis on a brain-based model of consciousness, really struggles to solve.
I can see why. So are there any experiments that support this idea of non-local entanglement of consciousness?
There have been some intriguing studies using Faraday cages, which are designed to block electromagnetic radiation. In these experiments, researchers observed instantaneous changes in the EEG patterns of two individuals who were strongly connected emotionally when one of them received a sensory stimulus, even though they were physically separated and shielded from electromagnetic interference.
That's wild. So there's some kind of communication happening that we can't explain with our current understanding of physics.
It would seem so. And some researchers have even proposed that the brain might function like a quantum hologram, decoding information that's stored non-locally, perhaps even drawing upon a vast cosmic library of information and experiences. Think about technologies like MRI, which rely on nuclear spin resonance, a phenomenon that involves the non-local exchange of information at the quantum level.
So you're saying our brains might be tapping into something much bigger than we realize.
It's a possibility that some scientists are seriously considering. And this leads to the conclusion that consciousness itself might be fundamentally non-local, existing in a distributed form, perhaps as probability waves spread throughout space. It's a radical concept, but one that aligns with the observed data.
Okay, I need a moment to process all of this. So, if consciousness is non-local, how does it interact with our physical bodies, which are constantly changing? Like our cells are dying and being replaced all the time, but we still experience a sense of continuity.
Right, that's a great question. Think about it this way. The function of DNA is often compared to a musical instrument. The structure of the instrument remains relatively stable, but the music it plays, its function, is dynamic and constantly changing.
Yeah.
So perhaps DNA acts like a crucial interface, providing a stable structure for the body's design and ensuring its continuity over time, while also facilitating its interaction with non-local consciousness and the vast storehouse of memories and experiences.
So DNA is like the sheet music that guides the orchestra of our cells, and consciousness is the conductor, so to speak.
That's a helpful analogy. And it could be that this interaction happens through mechanisms like nuclear spin resonance, direct non-local information transfer, or even indirectly through proteins, electromagnetic fields, and hormones. It's a complex and multifaceted process that we're only beginning to understand.
This is all so fascinating, but also kind of overwhelming. Now, shifting gears a bit, our sources also explore other altered states of consciousness beyond NDEs that might shed light on the nature of consciousness and its potential for surviving physical death.
Right. We have to remember that this whole discussion about consciousness and the afterlife has been going on for centuries, and there have been many insightful thinkers who have explored these questions long before modern neuroscience came along.
Like we mentioned William James and Frederick Myers earlier, they were pioneers in the study of mystical experiences, hypnosis, premonitions, and all sorts of phenomena that challenge the prevailing materialistic worldview of their time.
Exactly. Their work laid the groundwork for considering aspects of consciousness that might extend beyond the purely physical. And then you have deathbed visions, which are often dismissed as mere hallucinations, but which are increasingly being recognized as significant and frequently underreported experiences. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the renowned expert on death and dying, wrote extensively about these visions.
And those stories about empathetic NDEs are really interesting, where people present at a deathbed report sharing aspects of the dying person's experience. It's like their consciousnesses are somehow merging or becoming intertwined in those final moments.
And then there are postmortem experiences, where people report feeling a sense of contact with deceased loved ones. While these accounts are often anecdotal, they offer intriguing hints about the potential for consciousness to persist beyond the physical body and even communicate with those still living.
And the fact that these experiences are often described as feeling more real than any dream adds another layer of weight to them. It's not just a fleeting image or a vague feeling, it's something much more profound and enduring.
Exactly. And then there's the reported increase in intuitive sensitivity after NDEs, where individuals describe experiences of clairvoyance, clairsentience, and prognostic dreams. It's like they've had their antennas adjusted and are now able to tune into a wider range of frequencies. The analogy of a television set tuning into a wider spectrum of channels is often used to describe this enhanced receptivity.
So it's like NDEs can somehow amplify our innate ability to perceive information beyond our normal sensory channels.
That's the idea. And even the U.S. Air Force back in the day had a research program exploring non-local perception and teleportation. They were particularly interested in studies conducted in China with individuals who demonstrated exceptional intuitive abilities. It shows that even within the realm of government and military research, there has been an acknowledgement of the potential for human consciousness to transcend the limitations of space and time.
It's a reminder that what we consider fringe or paranormal today might become mainstream science tomorrow.
Exactly. And all of this underscores the need for a more open-minded and inclusive approach to scientific inquiry. We can't afford to dismiss findings just because they don't fit neatly into our existing paradigms. We need to embrace the unknown, the seemingly inexplicable, as potential catalysts for revising and expanding our scientific theories.
It's about being curious, asking tough questions, and being willing to follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it takes us into uncharted territory.
Absolutely. And when it comes to consciousness, we're definitely in uncharted territory. Now, all of this discussion inevitably leads us to some sensitive areas, like the definition of brain death and its implications for organ transplantation.
Right. And this is where things get really complex, both ethically and medically.
It's important to be clear that raising these points is not about discouraging organ donation, which can be an incredibly life-saving act. But it's crucial that we have a full and informed understanding of the complexities surrounding the diagnosis of brain death.
Especially given the stories and concerns raised by individuals who have questioned the accuracy and finality of the brain death diagnosis. The account of the woman in a coma who reportedly overheard discussions about euthanasia is particularly disturbing.
Yes, that story highlights the profound difficulty in definitively determining the precise moment when consciousness ceases, and the fact that criteria for brain death can vary significantly between countries adds another layer of complexity to the issue.
And erasing death makes a strong case for rethinking our concept of death altogether. Based on the advancements in resuscitation science, Dr. Parnia argues that death isn't necessarily this irreversible event that we've traditionally believed it to be. There's a period after the cessation of breathing and heartbeat where resuscitation is still possible and where consciousness might still be present, even if it's not readily detectable.
It's like maybe death isn't a point in time, but rather a process, and that process might be reversible, at least within a certain window of time.
It's almost like we need to redefine death not as a specific physiological event, but as the irreversible loss of that core essence of self, the consciousness, the mind, the psyche, the soul, whatever you want to call it.
Precisely. And when we consider the two primary sources of information we have about death, the subjective accounts from personal experiences and the objective data from scientific methods, the challenge lies in finding a way to bridge these two realms of knowledge. It's difficult to scientifically verify subjective experiences, but it's equally unscientific to dismiss millions of consistently reported experiences as mere illusion or fantasy.
It's like we need a more holistic approach, one that honors both the subjective and the objective, the scientific and the spiritual.
Exactly. And it's interesting to note that the philosophical perspective of Ostad-Ilahi, which posits the existence of consciousness beyond physical death, predates much of our modern scientific understanding of the potential reversibility of death.
It's a reminder that wisdom and insight can sometimes come from sources outside the realm of traditional science.
Absolutely. And to wrap up this fascinating exploration, both of your sources emphasize the critical importance of continuing to improve survival rates after cardiac arrest. Dr. Parnia makes a strong point that the overall system of care, from the initial emergency response to hospital treatment, has a bigger impact on outcomes than individual patient factors.
He's basically saying that we could save many more lives if we focus on improving the system as a whole. And this is backed up by reports from the American Heart Association. Every life saved represents a unique individual with their own story, their own potential, their own network of loved ones.
Exactly. And this brings us to the exciting frontier of future consciousness research. The big question that remains is, does consciousness, or the soul, continue to exist and function independently of the brain after physical death? Could it be a fundamental aspect of reality, a separate scientific entity that we haven't yet fully grasped or detected? These are the questions that are driving the next wave of research in this field.
It's like, are we on the verge of a scientific revolution that will completely transform our understanding of life, death, and the nature of consciousness itself?
Perhaps. We might need a new paradigm in neuroscience, one that's willing to expand beyond its current materialist framework, to truly grapple with these questions. And the implications are profound. The possibility that our consciousness might precede birth and survive death in a non-local realm beyond our current conceptions of time and space, as suggested by theories of non-local consciousness, could radically change how we view our existence and potentially diminish the fear of death that has haunted humanity for so long.
So as we emerge from this incredible deep dive, what are the key takeaways for you, our listener? We've explored the complexities of consciousness, examined the compelling evidence and diverse perspectives surrounding NDEs, and considered what might lie beyond the veil of death. We've encountered the limits.